Welcome to Working Dogs and Whiskey. Join Sean White and Jonathan Moses as they pour a glass and dive into insightful and fun conversations about dogs in all their incredible roles. So grab your favorite drink and let's raise a glass to great stories, laughs, and a whole lot of dog talk.
Welcome back to another episode of Working Dogs and Whiskey. God, I'm sitting here with John, my friend, co-host. How's it going, dude?
Pretty good, man. Pretty good.
You're in the middle of a message?
Yeah.
Come on, Ben.
All right, we're good. We'll be fine. All right.
Okay. All right, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, we've been sitting here for like an hour.
No,
We've been sitting here for like an hour bullshitting.
2 hours.
Has it really been that long?
Yeah.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Dude, no, it's been good because we were just talking about it earlier about it was great having a lot of interviews, and we do like interviewing people, networking, but there's definitely a relief that comes with just you and I talking. So this will be another episode of just you and
100%.
Yeah. But
I think that's part of the reason why we took so long to talk, just us just now.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's been like, all right, we got guests coming, and we're like, we definitely, when guests are coming, we try to be as professional as possible. Versus me and you just sitting down, shooting the shit. So we haven't gotten to do that in a while. I think that's part of the reason that we burned up so much time just now.
Yeah, and it's always weird to me because like we'll do all these pre-talks and then we'll go on these long tangents between dogs, business, and all that stuff, as if we don't talk to each other every day.
Seriously.
But it is what it is. It's our process. It works for now. It's gotten us to episode 20.
Woo! Episode 20, man. We did it.
Yeah, we're there. But no, it's been good though. But I'm actually looking forward to just the relief of, we don't have to worry about being so professional, I guess, and just being able to actually talk. And
I think the timeline is like one of the biggest things. Like we just do it when we want to do it.
Yeah, because there's a lot of flex in that one because we were actually supposed to record. Technically, we were supposed to record last week. But you were down.
Flu.
Yeah, with the flu, the whole family had it, right?
Yeah, actually, they were the ones sick last week, and it started whooping my ass on Monday. Really, just now was like I said yesterday, I was at 100%. So right in time to record.
Yeah. And how's Mason doing? He's good?
Yeah, he's good. He's good. Malia's good. Lily is good. Everybody is recovered. I think my dad's coming down with it, though. So it's still making its rounds.
Yeah, it's spreading over here in Texas, too. There's a lot of people getting sick. And, like, one of the guys that does he's in charge of our supply. And, like, his whole family was down for, like, two weeks or something like that. But, yeah, it's that time of year.
Yeah. I bet he was the only supply guy who knew how to access certain things too, wasn't he?
Maybe. I mean, he was able to access the shit that I needed. So I try not to worry about others in that capacity unless they reach out and they need something.
Yeah.
I have my own problems. So,
yeah.
But now, I mean, I will say the good part is, one, we've actually been recording a lot, and we have episodes in the chamber for these unforeseen events, so we can take a week off if we need to and still have episodes going. So we're finally ahead, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. Going into 2020.
Yeah, we actually are. Normally I'm pretty pessimistic about it, but I will say we're actually in a good spot as long as we sustain. And we're looking at probably, we'll probably be about a month ahead.
Yeah, that'll be good, man. Yeah. It will be good. Hell, this is not even mid-February yet. No, people won't be hearing this till March, right?
Yeah, it's like March 9th, I think, is when this will come out, which I am wearing my Eagles hat because as of last week from this date, we won the Super Bowl for the second time. So,
all right.
Super pumped.
I got no horse in this race, but congratulations.
Thank you. That's all I needed. No, but it's been good. And then hopefully in April, I'm going to try to finesse my way to hold the line.
Yeah.
So I think we might have some good interviews, and that'll be another, deposit into the episode box or whatever, in case for that time frame where we take 2 months off like we did last year.
Yeah.
At least we can keep
Yeah.
something running.
It's going to kill me to be down the road from Hold the Line and know you and Travis are there, and I'm going to be stuck in a classroom thinking
But
about...
you're serving the greater good.
Yeah, I still want to go to Hold the Line, though.
Well, you might be able to make it to hits, right? Possibly.
Yeah, I'd say I might be able to squeeze in hits.
All right. So hopefully we'll see you there, and that's, what is that, in August, I think?
Yeah, where's it at this year? Dallas? Is this year Dallas?
Yeah. Come
All
on,
right,
man.
yeah. All right, but
You're supposed to come out.
yeah, I got you. I say we'll do hits, and I'm going to try and see if I can squeeze in ATK9.
When is that?
I want to say that's either September or November. I could be getting my dates mixed up, though. Let's see.
Yeah, knowing you, that's pretty plausible.
It's 100% plausible. ATK9 2025. Hold on now. Oh, no, I think I was wrong. I think it's October.
This guy. See?
Yeah, October 6th through the 10th.
Where is it at?
Indiana.
That's random.
Butlerville. Well, they got that giant complex up there with like the parking garages and all like the crazy scenario replications.
Yeah, that's the spot. I think we're off air. We were talking about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's part of the reason why I want to go. I'm like, that's about some scenario based training and getting to see some good instructors and hands on. Like that seems like the one to go to. So I think that'll be cool.
Oh yeah. No, that'd be good to go to.
I do know Canines United in Greensboro, North Carolina in November. I think I got going to be going to that too. So and that should be another good one.
That's a byproduct of the interview we did with Mike Lilly.
Yep. Yeah. They got the information and looking forward to that. That should be pretty cool. I think that's a good year planned out.
Yeah, it seems like it's getting better and better, to be honest. I mean, knock on wood. Opportunities
on Friday, so we're going to see how good it gets.
Okay, yeah, there it is.
I think I'm just worried about shitting myself, to be honest.
From getting tased?
Yeah, I guess I'm just worried I'm not going to use the bathroom or something, and then I'm going to lock up or lose control or something like that.
No, I wouldn't say, and don't quote me on it, like I'm not an anatomy guy and all that, but from what I remember about the fucking, 10 courses that I did for tasers, or classes rather, I want to say because your muscles contract or whatever, that you're less likely to use the bathroom. However, afterwards, you might. I don't know if that's 100% true.
I'll find out when I take the classes this week.
Yeah, let me know. I could be 100% wrong. Somebody's probably listening. They're like, "What the fuck is he talking about?" Yeah. It's actually a miracle if you don't.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, we tell a lot of lies on this podcast.
Yeah.
It's fine. That's just one for this episode. But no, I'm pretty sure that actually is somewhat
It sounds right. Sounds good.
Yeah.
It makes me feel better.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. We just want to make you feel better. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that sucks. So
but sprayed.
We'll follow up on that I guess if you feel good enough, I guess next Friday we can follow
that
up
afternoon right after.
Yeah.
Friday.
Which is actually weird. Yeah, I'm forecasting another Saturday morning podcast.
Yeah. Not today, man. I shit on myself. It's just a fucking...
My eyes burn. I fucking shitted on my... Dude, I'm just not in the mood.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fuck these fuck.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Oh,
but you're going first, right? Or that's what you're...
Yeah, no, I'm going first. I don't care what anybody else says. I'm going first.
All right, so that's probably honestly the worst part. It's almost synonymous, and we'll bring it back to dogs, but the anticipation of, what's going to happen that's what really eats you up, honestly, or at least that was my experience when I went through it, both times. And I'm the fucking pussy that will sit there and watch everybody do it because I'm trying to I'm a consistent procrastinator. So if I can put it off, but then, like I told you with the OC, I saw one dude get sprayed, and he was the first one to break down, just stop. I remember he was running, and then he dropped to his knees, started screaming bloody murder. You would have thought he was watching his parents get killed in front of him. And I was like, oh no. I was like, I got to get in line. I I started scooting up ahead. I was like, I can't watch this too many more times. And they gave me the option to be in the first, like, I think top 5 or top 10 or something like that. But I was like, no, I'll wait. And I was like the 20th person or something, like in the 20s. And yeah, it was bad.
I did the same thing for the gas chamber though. Like they're like, hey, who wants to go first? Hey, put me in there. Let's go, Coach, right here. And they put us in. Fucking went through. You're like just spewing liquids from every crevice on your face and coughing violently, and everything burns, and it's like you just smoked 10,000 cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I came out. They gave us like 10 minutes to get ourselves together. Because if you went through first, you helped get everybody else through the process. And we're walking back, and they're like, how was it? I was like, it's not that bad. Dog shit. Absolutely sucked. Like, I was, in my mind, I guess, I was like, oh, I'm here. Like, it's fine. I went first. You guys are going to make it, too. I remember them coming out, and they're like, that was fucking terrible, Moses, and fucking throwing up and shit.
No, so quick tangent on that one, especially watching it as a drill instructor, because, you do 5 cycles of watching kids go through that, and it's not just like your platoon. Like I've watched probably almost 1,000 kids go through that. But the thing about it is, good thing that you went first, because the way that they do it, or at least for the Marine Corps, the way that they set it, like if you're the first one in, it really isn't as bad in comparison to the last person that goes in.
Yeah.
I forgot what it's called, but I want to say it's almost the same chemicals that are for OC spray.
It's
very close
tear gas,
to it.
essentially, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's tear gas. Sorry, not OC spray, but tear gas. And so, but the thing about tear gas is the longer it, is processing or whatever, lingering, the more potent it gets. So, very different responses from the kids that went in first to the kids that go in last. Like I mean, oh my God, you used to hear kids. No, I was going to make a bad comparison, but you hear kids like banging on the door, and you can't let them out. Like, no. I think they changed it, but it's for safety. Like, you don't want them to go out because there's nothing but tree line and stuff like that. So it's all in the name of safety, but like, you just hear them, like they just freak out and just run straight for the door. I remember being a recruit, and I was in the gas chamber. I remember my senior drill instructor, he told us, he was like, mind over matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter. And just keep that in your head. And when they made us take the mask off, you're supposed to just pop the seal. And I did the procedure. You stick 2 fingers in there, you get like a little taste, and then you drop your fingers out, and that's supposed to be the extent of it. And then you don your mask or whatever. But of course, the Marine Corps being on steroids for every ounce of quote unquote discipline. So one of the drill instructors walked up to me. He's like, did you take your mask, or did you break the seal? I'm trying to tell him yes. And then he was like, I don't believe you. He just snatches my mask off, and you have to put it back on. So I told you about how I felt about OC spray, and I was tweaking. Like 18-year-old Sean was fucking losing his goddamn mind. The only thing that stopped me from being one of those recruits that ran into, tried to get out and fight his way out was another kid. Something similar happened to him where they took the mask off. He went for the door. I forget who it was. Actually, I know. He's not in the Marine Corps anymore. Fuck him. Staff Sergeant Stearns was like 6'3", fucking clotheslined that kid straight to the ground. They dragged him back, and I was like, never mind. Put the mask back on. It's like, obviously I'm not gonna make it out of here. So I just put the mask on, and I was just like tapping my foot. That's all I remember. I was aggressively tapping my foot.
We lined up, and they're like, nobody panic. You're all going to go in here. So we peel our mask off. Well, you take the hood off first. And I remember just feeling my skin burned once it was exposed. And then they're like, okay, take the mask off, give your reporting statement. So it's Sir Trainee Moses. And that was it. Like, you inhale so much at that point, fucking coughing and sneezing. And they're like, hey, look, we're going to open this door after X amount of seconds, or I think it's like 30 seconds, something like that. Put your hand on the shoulder of the person beside you, and you're going to go out like single file, right? Just stay touching, because there's somebody by the door. And of course, I'm not by the exit door. I'm by the entry door.
Same.
Dog, by the time I went to go touch the person in front of me, all these motherfuckers have panicked and bolted and left me. So now I'm just walking around in this shit with my eyes burning. I can't see anything. I'm just like coughing and snotting and just drooling everywhere. and it took me like an extra 10 seconds to make it out of the fucking door. My first thing when I came out, I'm like, what the fuck happened to single file line?
Yeah, where's the unity?
Y'all left me.
Yeah.
Kids fucking hauled
man.
ass. I'm like,
All
yeah,
right.
we're all gonna stay perfectly calm.
All right, we'll dial it back in. I'll segue into what we're going to talk about because you're
Yeah.
reminding me of so many stories that as a drill instructor, there's so much you can do with that to punish kids. And it's like it's not even while they're in there; it's when they leave. But yeah, I'll probably incriminate myself. But
Yeah.
but well, we'll try to segue it in. Those kids leaving out though reminded me of like them just fading away, like just disappearing on you. And that's kind of what I want to get into. That was probably the poorest segue, but that's what I want to get into is I'm going to talk about fading cues out of dog.
Yeah.
So basically, we'll start probably on I guess the pet level would be the easiest way to get into it.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've heard that same story of, yeah, my dog knows how to sit, but only if I have treats, right? That type of situation. Yeah. So I wanted to talk about like basically some of the nuances on what goes into conditioning those signals, and then how do we gravitate away from them to where we get into the target behavior or the target response to the condition command or whatever the case may be. But and I'll start it out. I think one of the biggest things that people have to keep in mind, whether you're doing military working dogs, pets, police dogs, really in any discipline of training, sport dogs across the gambit, is you have to understand that there will always be a cue. You're only condensing it down to, at best, a single cue or something that's very subtle if it's multiple cues that trigger the dog. And so, like, we'll go for the sit. In most contexts, the sit is we want to lure the dog or give it some type of visual cue to operate off of. But the goal is to signal it down to, or condense it down to, just a verbal cue where I can say sit and the dog puts its butt on the ground. The problem is there's so many contingencies that go into it, from the conditioning process to the generalization of how far do we want to go, how strict is our criteria. So when we're talking about generalizing just a sit, are we okay with some pet dogs or their owners are okay with, yeah, as long as he's facing me and the stars align and I say sit, the dog follows through and I just don't have to have the treats out or whatever, and that's good enough for them. But like in my line of work or where I operate in, a sit has to be generalized, whether the dog is looking at me, it's facing away from me, it's, there's a lot of criteria that goes into it, especially when you're talking about off-leash capabilities. We have to cap them in mid-pursuit of so many things. Like they can be chasing a rabbit, they can be, maybe they want to go after a person, or they see an object that they're fixated on and they want to go search it. And we have to be able to say sit means sit in no matter what context. So there's just varying degrees on how we get into it. And just to, it's contingent off the complexity of the skill that you're operating in. So, but the beginning of it, most times from what I've seen across the board, is a giant signal that lets the dog know to go into behavior. So we'll keep it somewhat simplistic. If we're talking about sitting, usually most people will introduce it with a type of lure. And I'll touch on the operant side of it going deeper into it. But generally speaking, is usually a lure and we put the dog into position, right? I've seen it go so many different ways that I'll speak for myself that way. That's where I can intelligently speak at anyway. So I've done it with like, whether we're luring with food or we're luring with toys and stuff like that. But the biggest thing is that you cannot live in one thing for too long, right? You have to graduate and extinct out these cues. And so I think there's a big battle in trying to figure out, how can I use this little cue, to get the dog into behavior? Or if we're going to use a giant cue, how quickly can I get away with that? And both have their kind of their pitfalls, if you will. because if you're talking about using as little cue as necessary and that's your goal, it is good, but you have to be very, very precise on what you're doing because the dog is operating off of minimal input. So in most places where I've seen it be successful is you want to use a very sterile environment. So we condense down the variables of which the dog can be quote unquote distracted or very minimal things that the dog can interact with. So for me, like I tell my clients, I always start in my house. And it's when my son is asleep or he's not present, he's not home. If I have other dogs, they're in separate rooms. There's no crates around me and stuff for the dog to be distracted by. It's just me and the dog to do the work. And but then if we want to use a giant cue, like a giant hand lure, if you will, well, we can only live in that for so long before the dog picks up on, okay, yes, I'm sitting, but usually there's some other micro behaviors that go into it. I'm sniffing. I'm checking to see if you have food or rubber, the Kong in your hand. And all of that's information to the dog. So, and a lot of people get stuck in that because they do one too many reps of using it, or they do essentially backwards conditioning where they teach the dog not to only operate if you have food or toy. Because the go-to method is I don't graduate quick enough from the toy or the food. So now when the dog starts checking in, when I try to do what I call the magic trick, I do that one rep where I have maybe my fists closed as if I had food to simulate that. But the dog sniffs and says, wait a minute, as it's going in behavior, it says, you don't have anything. And it stops. Maybe I try again and then it fails. And then next rep, third rep, I pull out food, sniffs and says, okay, that's my signal now, right? And that becomes the cue to go into behavior. And that's how we get stuck in it. Oh, he only does it when I have a Kong, or he only does it when I have food. And to me, there's, I have my opinions on how to get out of that, but I want you to definitely chime in because I feel like there's a lot to unpack just on that.
Yeah, there definitely is. And you touched on a good bit there. But on that portion right there where you talk about the dog being dependent on, do I have this item, all these other things that kind of come into play. That's why it's so important to fade the cue or fade lures out. Because you'll see a lot of people start out that way. They have the food in their hand. Like you said, we'll use the sit as like our basic example. We got treat in my hand. Food goes over the dog's nose. Maybe I get them to go up, bend, mark and pay. Right. But like you said, if you live in that too long, now the behavior becomes contingent off of that. Right. That's the problem with not fading the cue out. I think that's why it's so important. There's certain times where I keep certain cues where I'm like, yeah, this is good enough. And I'll leave small cues in there. But you also want to be very specific, like you were saying, about what your cue is and try to condense it down to the smallest possible signal, because I want to be in control of this means that, right? Food is not part of the equation. Me having food or toy should not be, the behavior shouldn't be dependent on that. So that's where you want to make it about the motion or the signal that produces the reward, as opposed to the reward starts the behavior or the process, right? So we made lure in the beginning, like you were saying. So we take the food, lift up, just to get the dog interested in the beginning. And then we do that little Houdini trick. Food's in this hand or it's gone. I give you the same lure. And I think this is where a lot of people can get caught up, right? So let's say the dog's going with me throughout the process. Maybe it's sitting when I first have the food in my hand. So I'm taking the food, it's sitting all the way down on the first 3, right? On number 4, I switch, go to do the process. The dog goes into the sit, but it can tell, wait a minute, I don't think there's any food there, or something has changed. I'm still going to mark and pay that because now we've changed the criteria and the variables. So this is the moment where it's make or break. And I say, hey, this isn't contingent off the treat. If you still follow the lure or the signal or the cue that I'm giving, treat food or reward can still reappear. So when I go on that 4th rep and the dog goes into behavior, but maybe doesn't complete it as fast or doesn't go all the way down, but for going into behavior and following the lure, I'm still going to mark and pay. So I might go, yes, pay the dog for going into the behavior. And now I'm going to go back to using that signal, which is the hand over nose, right? Or hand going up, where I start to reduce my signals. It should be more dependent upon what am I telling you, and this behavior is going to allow you to access reward. Too many people stay in that luring phase where the behavior is dependent upon whatever reward they're luring the dog with. And that's how we start behaviors. Like, you can start it with negative reinforcement and do whatever you need to. But for the most part, I know a lot of trainers will start luring the dog and shaping some behaviors. That's fine. Like, that's how we start. But you need to know at what point do I get away from that? Otherwise, it is a part of the sequence now. And that's what we don't want. Like, my behavior should not be contingent upon there's some, like, here's the reward, here's the food. I give you a signal, and when I'm luring, I'm just getting mechanics. So now when I fade the reward out, I'm going to try and replicate those same mechanics, giving you the signal, and the food now comes after. So I change the sequence and when the reward is present. I think that's the biggest thing on when we start fading that out. We have to make sure our cues are what we want, very specific. Like, we're trying to convince them down to smaller movements. I know some people, and some people don't mind. Like, I see it a lot in the pet world. They tell their dog to lay down. And I've trained dogs where I'm like, hey, you can stand up and say down. And your dog's going to lay down. But every time they tell their dog to lay down, they've been conditioned to bend all the way over, say down, and point at the ground. Right? And I'm like, hey, you can sit. If that's, and they're like, yeah, I don't mind. Like, it's just what I've always done. I'm like, that's fine. That's cool. For me, I want to know I can just say down at any moment, whether I'm across the room, whatever, that's not contingent upon me doing all of these movements. Because it could become contingent on, hey, but he didn't bend over and point. Okay, well, I don't want to I'm lazy. Like, I don't want to bend over and point at the ground if I can stand up and say it, or if I can even stand and point. Because again, like, cues reduce down. So in the beginning, you'll see me luring my dog. Then you'll see me, I tell clients, like, we're in private lessons, we may start out on the ground with the dog, right? Getting the mechanics of doing the down. And then we're going to go up to our knees and do it. Then maybe we start bending over, and then we start standing up. Now we're just moving our arms, and we're condensing down our signal from, like you said, this big obvious movement to kind of micro movements, where now maybe I just point my finger down and the dog says that's the signal, and they go into the behavior.
Yeah. I want to circle back to what you were talking about marking the behavior, and that's a good point that I failed to bring up, because I know in this podcast we're trying to do a lot of, like, attention to detail, if you will, because we assume that everybody understands this. And I think we talked about it earlier in the week with nothing against police dog handlers. It's just their process, and from most schools, is so expedited because they need them out there policing, the communities, that the education aspect kind of deteriorates, right? And it's the same thing for the military. We're a little bit more fortunate that our schooling is a little bit longer, and so we have a lot more probably classroom time than we do. And they don't have, the students for the basic handlers course, they don't really have to worry about too much of problem solving with dogs on hand, like practical application, because those dogs are training aids. And so, there's pros and cons to that system. But one of the pros is that dog that they have that they're training with isn't the dog that they're going to be policing with. So they don't have to worry about that. So they have more time to talk about the theoretics. But going back to what you mentioned about being able to mark a behavior, you have to have your condition reinforcers established wholeheartedly, whether you're going to do it through, some type of luring method operantly, where the dog, dictates consequences and reinforcement and things like that. But you have to have a sound condition reinforcer, which all that means is I can tell the dog, for me, it would be a yes, and the dog understands it's going to get something from me, whether it's food, toy, or whatever the case. But I'm able to capture, I think the new term is screenshot for modern terms. But I can screenshot that behavior, and the dog is allowed to, exit out of or terminate behavior in order to access something. But the last thing that it remembers is what it was currently doing when that reinforcer was given, when that yes marker was given. So that is number one. And I don't because I know we constantly talk about this week in and week out, I don't want to ever on any episode really just gloss over that and assume that everybody understands that process.
Yeah.
So definitely wanted to highlight that fact. But going into what you mentioned about when you're essentially going from variable changes. And variable changes, I don't think we give enough credit to what the dog is interpreting as a variable or a change in criteria or a variable. So like you said, even you going from, if we're going for the down, if the criteria is bending over and that's pretty much all the stars align, okay, he says down, but then he bends over, he goes all the way down, and then I follow through, and that's usually when the point of reinforcement. I'm sorry, you mentioned it for the sit, but we'll use the down. When I'm ready to change a variable, and in that context, maybe you're not going to bend over as much, right? That even if it's a degree difference, that is something that if the dog is very in tune with the training process and very receptive, and it's all contingent on the dog, but those are two different signals. And he may question, the 1 degree of, you not bending all the way over, you're bending, at 44 vice 45 degrees. That may be a different sight picture for the dog. And so you may see, some, if you will, resiliency in behavior. And it's not really that he's trying to oppose you. He's trying to figure out, is that the same? And so if he samples it and I see, a moment of confusion and the dog kind of bends, maybe I will take that one, right? So I'll decrease my expectation when I'm ramping up my criteria. Now, how we get away with it, because people will question, well, okay, if you keep doing that and, sacrificing criteria in which you'll reward for variable changes, then how do you get to the end result? But the thing is you're banking on the amount of repetition and the conditioning process, and that looks different for every dog. But generally speaking, the amount of reps that I spent in the initial luring phase should be the most reps that I'll ever have to live in, right?
Yes.
As I change, the dog will start making an association. Okay, down it is not really contingent on his movements because I can never keep up with him. He's too inconsistent. But the only thing that I hear is the verbal signal, and that is the common denominator. He always says down before he does anything. And the end result, the screenshot, is me with elbows on the deck or on the ground, whatever the case may be. And that's when the dog starts to create that criteria and that association. That down is just down. And it starts to, then we gravitate into the big scale of generalization where the dog understands down is just lay down. And then after that, you're off to the races on how much do you want to expose your dog to? Does down mean down, standing? Does it mean down when I'm on an elevated surface? Does down mean down, whether I can see him or not? And that's where the nuances in training go into. And again, like I said in the beginning, it just depends on what you need the dog for. How critical is that down or that task for the dog to do, and that will dictate how much investment I'm going to put in generalizing the behavior.
Exactly. I think part of the reason why we see people get stuck with fading the lure so much too is luring gives like a false sense of confidence in a way, because the dog can do it very quickly because it's just kind of blindly following something. It's aroused, it has visual hope of here's my goal. So the dog generally moves with a little bit more sense of purpose and urgency. And when we fade the lure out, like you said, we change that 1 degree sight picture for the dogs, all of a sudden the dog kind of hesitates a little bit. I know I've used this example before, but if you're in class and you know the answer to something, your hand goes up very quickly. When you're questioning it, all of a sudden you're kind of slowly putting it up, you're looking around the room, and you're like, is that right? And you're more cautious. Same thing for the dog when that lure, all of a sudden, or that item is taken out of the picture, or we start fading it out. Now the dog is going from something that was very confident in, which was just blindly following this lure, to now it's like, okay, wait, this is different. Am I still doing the right thing? People see that hesitation And I feel like they kind of go, oh, well, that's not as fast as it was, or that's not the same clarity. So they have a tendency to just kind of live there, where they've always got the Kong underneath the arm or the treat over the dog's head. You're going to see like a lag, like a little bit of latency in the dog's understanding of what to do as we change criteria. As long as you understand that the dog's going to connect the dots, like you were saying, as it says, oh, this is the same thing, we're just changing some of the criteria. It's going to start looking for what makes this the same as that. And if you're consistent in your cues, where now you faded out the cues, or your verbal has always been present during this process as you're fading, then like you said, the dog's going to learn to rely on the verbal. You'll see that speed and confidence come back, or now the dog's back into it super fast just on the verbal. But people see that little bit of latency and lag, and they're like, nope, can't be right. My dog's unsure. We're going to go back. So no need to go back. You just have to move forward and trust and know that that's part of the process.
Yeah, and 100%, because a lot of people, I think it's hard to, especially if you're doing your first couple of dogs, whether it's pet working dogs, like you don't really, you can hear about the process, sure, but you don't know what it looks like. And it's very deceptive when you're actually doing it. Because I mean, I fell victim to it. I was like, fuck, I was one of those guys that would always bring out the Kong. And it took for one dog that I could not get away from it to understand, well, two different dogs. One, the first one I'll speak on was when I first started training dogs for the military. And I could not get them into, I want to say it was I think both situations, it was the down. And I could not get them graduate from the Kong lure. And so one dog, I had to do the old method of using compulsion and basically just negative reinforcement until you just drop and then rewarded him out of it. It's a dirty version of Nipopo, if you will. But the other dog, and this is where we'll kind of segue into the operant side of things. The other dog, he had an issue where inadvertently I taught him to basically, he would bend his legs, and then he caught me slipping when I didn't have the Kong. And then he slowly settled into the down, and I kept rewarding that. So, and then on top of that, I was like, I should buff, it'll even out. And so when you would tell him to down within probably 20 reps of doing that, his down was literally that, like down, and he would kind of go in the down and then settle eventually. And I was like, that just doesn't pay the bills on, what we need to do for the military. But thank God, that's when I was entertaining taking more of a positive approach. And so I gave my team like 10 days we would not use choke chains, for the first 10 days of training. And I didn't care what we were working on, obedience, bite work. We're going to figure it out, at least for the first 10 days. And that was just more of a personal goal. So I'm helping, this isn't my dog. This is another guy's dog that I'm trying to teach him how to train. So went to the drawing board, actually wrote it on a piece of cardboard. And I was like, all right, if he only knows two behaviors that benefit him. And this is where we get into the operant side of it. And I was like, if we wait him out, he should cycle through first, or sit, because that was the first learned behavior that he learned for obedience. And then he'll cycle into that down, right? And so what ended up happening was eventually he would just sit, go into the down, but he would go into it without the aid of luring. He would just go straight into it. So we captured that repeatedly, probably about 5 to 7 times. I was like, now, this is where we introduce, Pavlovian conditioning, which is essentially now we're going to introduce the unknown, which is the word down. Even though he had been introduced to it somewhat, it wasn't a strong correlation yet. And I said, okay, the signal is when he sits, the next thing he will do is drop to the down. I just need you to name it down before he does it, right? And so dog sits, James, the dude that was training him, down, and the dog was going to do it anyway. Boom. We make associations. I think James missed it once where the dog sat and laid down on his own. And I was like, no worries, break him out of behavior. Tell him no, break him out of behavior. And the reason for that is we start building the correlation. No, you only do this when the signal happens, right? The unknown stimulus or whatever predicts that signal. So now we're introducing some levels of punishment, negative punishment, by not rewarding him doing it on his own. So we kind of flip the contract on him. Before it was good to do on your own. Now you must only get rewarded when we signal that. And then after that, I mean, within a few days, I'm going to say within a week, we had a solid sit and a down, and we had discrimination between the two behaviors on the dog's behalf. The dog understood sit means put my butt on the ground, don't do anything else until I'm told down, and his down was phenomenal. The benefit of doing that was that we were able to gravitate from all these other cues that we would have, because the criteria is you have to down the dog at a minimum of 6 feet away. So I told him, he was like, do I need to stand in front of him when we're doing the operate? And said, no, just paint the picture now. He's going to do this shit regardless. Just go ahead and be at the end of the leash, tell him down, we're already done. So after that, the only real battle is him coming out and anticipating, right? And we just use negative punishment. We don't reward, like I said previously, the dog doing it outside of signal on his own. And that takes a good amount of repetitions and can be somewhat frustrating in and of itself. But you're basically on our end is waiting the dog out, in some degrees. But the benefit is that very minimal input. So I think Bart Bellin says it best, as much as necessary, but a little as possible, or something to that effect, right? But and that's where I learned to, that's another way of going away from fading, your cues, is let the dog do most of the work. We fight the dogs constantly and try to give them all this input, and some things they're just able to do on their own. And when it's their idea, it's significantly stronger. Like that behavior is just, it's intensified.
That seems to be definitely a common trend whenever you're capturing behaviors like that. I don't know if you remember when I had Apex out and he was running through the tunnels and doing the jumps. And it just started with me marking it, like him going over there. I think I threw a ball through there or something, and he just went through it. Yes. I started paying him. And the behavior for him was very addicting because it was his own behavior that he created. And it got to the point where I only started paying him for, hey, I'm going to put this on cue now. So tunnel. Boom. He went on his own. I didn't say tunnel. Nothing. No. Reset. Tunnel. Boom. And I pay him. And to this day, it is one of his, it's crazy. And we won't get into the background now. But he's got terrible secondary obedience and control. Yeah. But I'm pretty confident right now, and I've done it. Even at this point, if there were a decoy in front of him and I had a tunnel out, he would thoroughly enjoy doing the tunnel rather than biting the decoy, because it almost gives him the same level of satisfaction. He's still going to want to bite, but he would do the tunnel without conflict, because he'd be like, hey, is this a bridge to reward? Can I go through the tunnel and then bite him? Do I come back? What do we need to do? But it's a lot better when it's their idea. And like you said, whenever I'm with pet dogs, I kind of let it go a little bit. We use a lot of negative reinforcement in the behaviors and stuff. But with my personal dogs, I'm very, very meticulous about what cues I'm using and trying to have as little as possible. I don't want to have to put in a ton of input into these behaviors because I want to be able to generalize it easier. I don't want the dog looking at me for direction necessarily. I want them to say, okay, what did he say? It means do this. I've had some dogs, you remember Dexter, the fucking psychopath?
Boy. Yeah, the child eater.
Yeah, now lighting up criminals in Pueblo, Colorado. He was so detailed on his sit. I remember I would tell him to sit, and I was expecting him to sit like one of my dogs. I didn't do his initial foundation obedience, but I told him to sit, and I noticed he would shift in front of me, cock to my left side, and he was almost always 3 feet away. And I was like, all right, whatever. And I didn't pick up on it at first until at one point he was on my right side standing in front of me, and I told him to sit, and he shifted over to my left.
Yeah.
And position. I looked and I was like, it's not what sit means. Yes, his butt was on the ground, but it doesn't mean you have to transition to this exact spot every time.
Yeah.
So I started playing all kinds of little games with him, back tying him, keeping him at a distance. I remember I turned and faced the wall. I was like, sit. And you should have seen his head almost implode. He just kept trying to adjust himself. I'm literally face to face with a fence.
Yeah.
And he's like, fuck, but I can't get where I need to. And I thought I was going to get bit because the kind of dog he was.
Yeah.
And he finally just I don't know what to do, and threw his butt on the ground, and I marked and paid him through it and started dismantling those beliefs that being in front of me on my left side was a part of the sequence. But it's funny because they will look for stuff like that we didn't even necessarily intend. Like, we're just in the habit of paying in the same spot, or every time we say it, they're maybe when they were doing it, it could have been that's just how long their leash was, and they always had it in their left hand. So he might have always been in that spot when he was paid for sit. To us, that seems minor. To him, that was an essential part of the sequence, apparently. So that's important. So I want to know what my cues are. I want to make sure I can fade them out and identify them. Like, I want to reduce these as much as possible, because for me personally, like I said, I get away with it with pet dogs sometimes. A lot of owners don't necessarily care, or it depends on the circumstances. On my off-leash dogs, yeah, I'm going to have to generalize these behaviors. Sit means sit wherever you are. You just want on-leash obedience to walk your dog down the street. I don't necessarily care if they think they can only sit within the extent of the leash. That's fine. It's what they were trained to do. But I personally like to generalize the behavior as much as possible. And one of the easier ways to do that is to have as little cues as possible. Now, when it's just contingent upon, or not as many big cues or condensing them down, now it's just contingent upon I give you the signal, you do the behavior. Not did my hand reach into my pocket, not is there food in my hand when I said it. I said this happens, now you have the possibility of reward or avoiding correction or whatever it is.
And that's, I want to kind of touch on the negative reinforcement aspect. So, like, for me, I had a dog this whole week, had an outing issue, if you will. It just was never educated on how to out, and never consistently anyway. So the dog didn't understand how to let go of a toy. And due to time constraints and everything else, only had like 3 days to kind of play with it, Wednesday through Friday. So a lot of it was pressure on, dog releases, and then pressure comes off, and then it's rewarded, Nipopo at its finest, right? But the thing is, and I think you kind of touched on it earlier, if I'm going to use negative reinforcement or something pretty aversive to a dog, try to, one, I don't name the behavior until I like it and it's consistent. And I have a fluid response from the negative reinforcement. That is number one, right? Because there's just, when you dabble in negative reinforcement, there's a myriad of ways of how that's going to look on the dog's end. And the last thing I want to do is pair when it's in the infancy stages, where generally speaking is pretty ugly. So the dog has to find its advantage out of the negative reinforcement that's being applied. But for this dog particularly, I had a strong, very, very telegraphed cue that I was going to apply pressure. And I remember one of the guys asked me, he's like, why do you always, like, I was reduced to using a choke chain. He's like, why do you do all these giant cues? I purposely adjusted the choke chain into perfect position. I guess had my elbow cocked up, and then I would slowly, methodically pull, right? And he's like, why are you doing it that way? Like, it looks creepy as hell. And I was like, this is my communication. I am telling this dog to out, right? I'm now, once within a certain couple of reps, I'm now measuring it. And so the analogy I always use for that is, you would never get in your car and just jump the volume, to max and then lower it back down, right? You're going to kind of gradually build it up to see where a good point is for whatever it is that you're listening to. Because I have different volumes if I'm listening to a podcast, vice if I'm listening to rap music and I'm trying to get hype, so there's different things. The whole concept is that you're going to slowly dial that in, and you're measuring as you're going up, right? So as I'm applying pressure, more and more pressure, volume's going up, I'm measuring at which point does the dog concede. When does it say, all right, I want to turn the volume off, right? So, but I want to telegraph that without using my verbal marker to predict it, because once it's good, once it can beat it, and then I know the dog understands, man, he's already loosening up when I'm adjusting the choke chain, or I'm applying very, very minimal pressure. Okay, easy enough. Now we're consistent and fluid in that language. All I have to do is name out, and then I telegraph, and the dog starts to beat it. And I'm sure there's someone out there that can articulate this better, but it's just God's gift that dogs are naturally programmed to be almost experts at avoiding things that they don't want to interact with. So, and that's how we get away with training. But I intentionally, if I'm going to use negative reinforcement, for the most part, there are exceptions to the rule where I will mask a lot of my physical movements in order to kind of, for a shock value, like single event learning, if you will. But those are very one-off situations where I'll apply that methodology. But outside of that, I try to give the dog the strongest telegraph cues, because just like everything else in dog training, and I'm really taking a deeper dive, a lot of what we perceive is opposite for the dog's perception. So like to us, we would think, no, minimal cues for negative reinforcement, but actually from my experience and what I've seen from other trainers, it creates a lot of superstitious behaviors where they generalize the wrong thing and they take it a whole different direction. I say, hey, look, I'm about to administer pressure, right? And you could get out of this, and the dog has to find its way after that. And that now we're just at repetitions, right? But that's one of the ways that I graduate from, if I'm going to use negative reinforcement. And that's, a slip lead into a sit, same thing. I'm giving them giant, slow, methodical telegraph cues. It's going to happen. It's happening. It's up to you to turn it off.
I think that's why so many people get in trouble with e-collars. Exactly what you're just saying. They give minimal cues, because when you're using a leash to manipulate a dog, even when you're giving small movements, like when me and you teach heel the same way you taught it to me, where we take the heel or leash, dog comes around and we kind of guide the dog into the heel position. Well, even if I reduce that down to the smallest movement of me just doing it with my wrist, just my wrist moving in this C pattern or this U shape to my side, it's still a pretty significant cue to a dog. Like, they're very detailed. Like you said, God's gift that they can read us so well and they watch us so much. But I feel like a lot of people get to the e-collar without having proofed their dogs, without having faded their lures properly, where they are on that verbal and the dog's pretty consistent, and they start stimming too fast. Stimming a dog on a remote, unless I usually see it go one of two ways. They're either very secretive about it, it's in their pocket, or they're kind of like very low key about it and pressing the button, and there's nothing to go off of, really. Like, the dog doesn't have enough clarity to understand the behavior, but they know it's being corrected left and right, and they can't figure out why. So I'll see a lot of superstition be created that way. Or my all-time favorite, the pet owners that are like, I got the remote, and they throw the remote in the dog's face, and they're like, see it? And they start pressing the button. And now the dogs behave whenever they see the remote is present. Well, not behavior. They're, again, superstitious. They're like, I'm afraid to try anything. So whenever you have that thing, weird shit starts happening. So having predictable cues is definitely a part of dog training. Knowing how to reduce them down, getting them onto the verbal. But exactly what you were just talking about, it just made a bell go off in my head, where I see so many superstitious behaviors out of dogs because e-collars are put on them. Dog was blasted or corrected and didn't even understand why or where from. It's just not enough information for the dog to be able to really process and understand why it's happening. So then they start to worry about, like, if a shadow from a bird went overhead at the time, maybe now they're scared of bird shadows. Like, there's just so little feedback that the dog's looking for something on why this happened. And an e-collar is a very easy tool to do that with, but it's a great tool because at the same time, now when I need to correct my dog or use negative reinforcement into a behavior, if I've done the proper steps, now I can use the e-collar to kind of clean up some of my training, where maybe the dog, like I said with the sit, where maybe my dog was like, okay, well, we've always done sit within a 6 to 10 foot line. So maybe at 30 feet, this doesn't apply. Or, at this distance or whatever, I can use an e-collar to say, hey, distance doesn't necessarily matter. Right. Or even if I don't have a leash in my hands, or you're not wearing a collar, like your prong collar or something like that, I can use an e-collar to still correct and give the dog information, or use negative reinforcement to push them into a behavior without having to have, like I said, a leash in my hand. Because even me giving slight feedback with the leash is a big signal to the dog if it's done properly. And hell, I can even hand you the e-collar and be like, hey, I'm going to go out here and work with my dog. You press the button. And the dog now is just relying on the behavior being the thing that starts it. So, wife just dropped off the care package.
Nice.
Ooh.
What Chai tea?
Yeah, my favorite.
I'm not a huge fan of it. Jasmine loves it, my ex-wife. But it
Yeah, she
looks
does this
good. It's
right.
steamy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a testament to her attention span. No, but and we'll start to wrap it up on this one. I'm glad you brought up e-collars. So I want to get your thoughts because it made sense to me, but I wanted to see how you interpret it. So let's shift gears into like sport training, or maybe some police departments, depending on their requirements for certification. I guess this could be prevalent to them. But so we had a big discussion on what's typically best practice to get rid of the e-collar. So in monitoring and just like most sports, you can train with whatever tools and everything else that you want to train with. But when the dog goes on the field for trial day, the dog is naked. There's a leash or a collar on it in the beginning, and it can't be an electronic collar. None of that. But when you start actually competing in the trial and you're in monitoring, I mean, you're out there minimum, I think 35 minutes is the fastest I clocked it at nationals. But you're out there for a minimum of 35 minutes, and the dog, there's strenuous amounts of multiple tests that the dog has to operate under. But the whole point was, what is best practice to get away from the e-collar? Basically what the decoy that we brought out from Todd Dunlap, Deja, she was saying a lot of people practice like they want perfection. So the closer we get to trial day, we're 2 or 3 days out, all of a sudden we hold the dog accountable for every mistake because we want it kind of somewhat a balanced level of caution, basically, because when the hope is when the dog makes a mistake absent of the collar, it will say, wait, I can beat the pressure, right? Yeah. Which she was saying for her dog is she kind of does some of the opposite. She looks for she'll take mental notes and prioritize what the dog is really, really bad at. And those are what she looks to correct. The little things, the healing in between, moving from positions on the field or areas on the field, the dog kind of gets a little loose. Well, that's what he's going to see in trial, So I don't really need to correct him, because the problem is for every little thing that you correct, yes, you can make the dog very, very cautious in what it does, and it will be very detailed if you layer in positive reinforcement, all that stuff. But the problem is these guys are criminals, and they're always looking for a loophole. So when they go on trial day and they make that mistake, maybe they make it once and they go back into heel position where you normally would have corrected, but then it does it again, and it's like, wait a minute, you don't have anything to compel me. Well, what's different about this? Now I got to take intake information. When the setup happens, I know you cannot do anything, right? Or you're incapable for some reason of doing anything. And then depending on how much the dog finds it reinforcing to do other things, or it just, it undermines listening. So what she was saying is, I'll let the dog kind of be loose in certain things that aren't as critical to the overall trial. And maybe I'll lose a few points here and there. But like the big things that I need, like a recall or something like that, if the dog hangs around too long, I will stem for that, because that's where I want to make my deposit and say, no, you have to do this. This is a very critical task where the dog is almost reflexive, pretty much. And it's pretty sound. Yeah, maybe he was loose in the heel, but this dog will always come back, right? Because he's conditioned and he thinks that there's no other option. And if training is obviously solidified and proficient and everything else that goes in, the amount of repetition, the dogs will never question whether a collar is on or off. It says it's all contingent about the behavior. And then there's some talks about intermittently sampling what certain things look like without a collar. But she was saying ultimately for her, the collar doesn't come off until trial day. But she was like, they're aware, like they know, even if a dog is not as in tune with it and super compliant, it knows that something's physically on its neck, vice when it's not. So we're not going to ever really shy away from that.
Prize, yeah.
Yeah. So the other part is, she was like, so we just have to be sparing or use our corrections very sparingly for what, we want to do. And it made a lot of sense because I thought about, I can't remember the article that I read where they were talking about the use of e-collar being abusive. And it's not exactly the e-collar itself. Basically, it was condensed down to the amount of depressions of the button. So the amount of stems that the dog receives. they basically say we're overboarding, or doing too much, too many corrections, things that you would not typically see on a leash correction. We feel comfortable depressing a button because we're low stem. And I'm not saying low stem is bad. It has its merit, but from the science world or whatever, scientists, their perception of abuse is the amount, whether it's, you're on a Garmin 550 and you're level 1, but you're just nagging the dog on a level 1. They were saying that's too much. So what's the alternative? You would use a pressure or a level that will just compel the dog in one shot. And I'm not saying go to a 7 or was it 121? It's basically, but I'm just saying, you find a level that makes the behavior happen, that's consistent, and inherently you should only have to use it very, very finite.
Yeah. I'm kind of in a similar school of thought as she is, and it's changed over the years. I am the way I used to think about it, and I've gone through it firsthand, where I'm correcting the dog for everything, where I'm like, nope, gotta get them, right? And like you said, it's not things I'd usually correct the dog for. Like in the weeks prior, I'm like, oh, okay, like this was allowed in training, and now all of a sudden the dog is looking for this stem. Just like we talked about certain things becoming part of the sequence, you can make e-collar become part of your sequence or expectation of behavior, like in your behavior chain. Mm-hmm. So if I'm constantly stemming the dog and the dog now has that expectation, when that part of the chain is gone, now all of a sudden dog's like consequences faded away in this moment. You hear people say their dogs are trial smart, and that's generally what I think is happening. Where I kind of evolved to is exactly what you were just talking about. I always have the e-collar on the dog prepared to make a correction, because I don't want something terrible to go wrong. Like we talked about recall, right? Like if my dog is always recalled and for some reason something happens and I don't have the collar on them at all, I do know people who are like, oh, we're trial prepping, collars off. Okay, it can work, I guess, but what if something goes wrong in that moment? Now I have no ability to correct it. My dog's experimenting with that behavior. So I do believe I should always have the ability to correct my dog. But now I look at, okay, what are the big ticket items? Like, where do I know we excel and where are we weak at? Just talked to Travis yesterday. Travis and Marla, they're in SoCal right now.
Yeah, he just messaged us, actually.
Oh, dude. All right. Yeah. I'll tell you offline, but okay. We're talking about trial and stuff, and we were talking about how you just don't change shit before trial or right before certification. That is not when you go in and go, oh, I'm just going to fix this, right? Because you'll create issues in a heartbeat. Like I've done it. You will create some issues, boy. So if it wasn't a big deal the entire time leading up to your trial picture and you hadn't trained for it, don't mess with it. Where I'm going to use my correction is where I've already laid down expectations on those big ticket items that my dog does well. And then you just have to mitigate or worry about, hopefully you mitigate it right during your training process of the areas where you know you struggle. But I do believe as I get closer to trial, so for me, let's say I got a trial a month out, maybe I'm already going through my routine. I know what it looks like. I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to run through it and say, okay, this is where we did good. This is where we did bad. All right, this is where we struggled. And I'm going to have to assess, like, all right, why did we do bad here? Is it a foundational issue? Is it lack of repetition? Is it competing motivators? And I'm going to look at it and say, okay, this is why. How do I address this? I'm going to come up with a plan, right? Again, I want to say this is what is the most important and work my way back. So 4 weeks out, I am going to try and clean up the overall picture. And then I'm already have in my head, like, all right, here were the big ticket item things, these things I need to focus on. And those are what I'm going to be correcting with my e-collar, hand it off and say, hey, I just did it for a guy who was getting ready for a certification. The guy I told you about, his dog was getting away from him. He cut him off leash. The dog didn't really have an off leash heel. He knew how to come into position, but no one had showed him how to stay with the handler absent of the leash. So he would start walking, and if he was in a straight line, he'd be okay. But the second the dog forged forward or he wanted to go make a left or right turn, the dog was unsure of how to put itself back in the position or where it should be. It was being corrected. So then he had a utility finish, which means he comes around the right side and came to his left. Well, what happened is it created conflict where the dog just circled him. So we actually condensed it down, and I said, okay, to pass certification and get them truly off leash, this is what we're going to do. Have him come into position, and we started shifting. Like literally, if he was facing straight, he would do a half step, like enough to just turn his feet and his shoulders to the left and help with the leash. And we tap the E, dog shift in the position, we reward until he could shift in a circle going either direction, and the dog could stay beside him. And then we incorporated like, okay, you're going to walk around in a circle or a square, and we're going to start taking our turns. Dog shifts, tap, he moves back into position. Did the dog still forage? Yes. Were there little things I'd love to go back and clean up? 100%. But the most important thing was the dog stopped circling him. It wasn't biting him out of frustration or confusion anymore. And they could now take turns, like left and right turns. And the dog shifted itself. Because again, if he shifted left, instead of the dog pivoting its back legs and staying in position, it would just run around him to try and come back to the original position. But then that led to confusion as they kept moving, and the dog just kept running because it could never get back to that original spot. So by condensing that down and saying this is the big thing we need to focus on, he was able to go out and successfully do the routine and do it well, even though ideally, like, could I have stemmed the dog like, hey, he's too far forward, boom, or nope, that's not tight enough. And could I have got him on those behaviors and nicked him to death on the e-collar? Yeah. Why? We needed to be at a certain point. This was the main thing, just the dog staying with him for certification. We have time to go back and clean it up later, but trying to do all your cleaning up at the last minute, yeah, that's not going to get you anywhere. So I'm a big believer now in 3-4 weeks out, okay, we can dial in those big ticket items. By the second to last week, I really try and, like, what I'm looking for is my stemming or my corrections should decrease significantly. Like, are we getting clarity and the behavior? Are we looking good? Because what should happen is leading up to trial time, I don't want to have to use the collar much at all. Like, we practiced the day before his certification, and I was throwing balls and other distractors and stuff out, and I stemmed the dog maybe 4 times because it stayed in position. It got the general idea of I stay with him and I'm aware of where I'm at. That was good. I was like, we're not going to worry about anything else. Yeah. But my goal is I want to identify big ticket items, correct them. Kind of got to let some of the small stuff go as you're getting that close to trial or certification time. What's gonna help you pass? What are the things you need to fix to pass? And then I want to see my e-collar use fade out. It's still on the dog. I cannot stress. I fucking hate watching the e-collars come off the dogs. And then, well, let's just run through it and see what happens. No, like, absolutely not. Let's just reduce how much we're using it and making sure the dog is consistent with behavior absent of the stem. Because again, I don't want to overuse it where the stem is now part of the sequence.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. And I think one of the bigger things that we have to take into consideration, because there can be arguments made that like, oh, okay, you're just a shitty dog trainer because you don't want to fix the little things. And I think people combat that. But in that arena where you're talking about a police certification is on the line, the objective really is to just pass. There's no like competitive level. You don't get extra points for fancy healing. You don't get extra points for like that, for the dog outed really quickly, injection out by a dog that took like 2 seconds to out. Yeah. Right. So, and I struggle with that for a long time because being at Lackland where you're just constantly mass production, like that really is like the incentive to keep you going. It's like, how can I, for me, at the end of it, make my trainers look good and like they had the best healing, they had the best, whatever. But it's still internal. Like there's no true merit in doing that. It is a certification and it's just a measurement of your training, right? And same thing for sports. Like I know, I'm glad we had this conversation years ago, but like a lot of people take sport trials and they look at it as like, if a passer fell in fucking life, and it's like, that has nothing to do with you. It's just a measurement tool to see how you stack against that set of particular dogs at that one given moment. And, and can your dog either hit at least the minimum to pass, or does it excel a little bit further, right? And for me, starting to go into the sport world, even the dogs that I'm helping train is a decoy. I look at some of the flaws and I'm like, okay, that's information on me as a decoy. This is where training can be enhanced, or maybe we lived too long addressing this issue and we didn't even touch this one. So that doesn't look as clean, in the routine. So it's just information, right? At the end of the day, really. And you can get wrapped up in trophies and titles and my club does this and it does that. And I pray, hopefully that'll never be my objective, but I always look at these competitions as just measuring goals. And I'm actually doing the opposite. I'm not really looking for the dog to do well. I expect it to do well. I'm a decent trainer, or whatever, and I have a decent amount of knowledge to bring to the table. And along with the input of others, like there's people that in my club that's been doing this for almost probably longer than I've been alive. And so I take all of that into consideration, and I'm now just looking at what the dog does wrong, not out of anger or whatever the case or reprisal. It's like, okay, that's the one. That's where I failed the dog. No worries. Now I got to bring that to the drawing board so that we can address that, talk about it, and figure out how we, do this better. Or,
Exactly.
Do we kind of pollute it and it's just, all right, this is as good as it's going to get between our capabilities and just, the dog through genetics and,
Repetition.
potentially poor training.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and that's how I look at it. But I think people get wrapped up in, it's got to be perfect. This is me on the line. This is a direct reflection of me, which in some regards, yes, it is. But, if you take it in that light, I don't think you're going to get, you're operating under a glass ceiling. Like you're only going to get so good because your ego is getting in the way of actual education of the animal. So.
Exactly. And it's so funny, like I was pulling Mona and Crash out, I pulled them out back to back. And if you look at Crash's obedience, it's just very like functional. I guess it looks kind of good. He's got a focus heel and everything, but like just very functional obedience. I don't give a damn how he like sits or heels or does whatever. Like my police dog, I'm like, this is whatever. Just do it, And I just want to make sure it's generalized very well. And then I pulled Mona out. I guess I hadn't like done anything with her in a little while. It's not even that I was on. I can tell I was on that app because like I was like foos, and she like pivoted in perfect. Made sure her feet were exactly where they should be, folding down, how she sat, and I'm like, it almost like fucked me up for a second. I was like, oh, that's right. Like I forgot this is very like detailed, choreographed. That's because we're talking about the dog that I'm chasing points with versus the dog I'm like, I need you to do your job.
Right.
So, and I'm not saying like that's no excuse for it. Like nobody should be doing lazy training. You need to be proofing and generalizing. But like, I don't care if he has a folding down. He does. But I didn't do it. Like I wouldn't have cared. And even just the precision in which they do things is very different. I meant to tell you about that the other night. I looked and I was like, oh man, what kind of fucking fancy shit is this? But it's just that difference in I'm looking to score points versus this is the dog's job and I just need good, strong behaviors. I do think like as a long-time pet trainer now, I guess long time, depends what you consider long, but been doing it for a little while. I feel like sport dogs, I feel like after a certain point, once you're comfortable in your abilities as a pet trainer, you should go get a sport dog because we can kind of fall complacent where the criteria for behavior is so low because the owners don't necessarily care. Like, again, they just want their dogs to do it, but like their dog's not performing in a bunch of different environments. Usually it's performing a task in their house with the same amount of environmental distractors it has every day. Most of them aren't taking their dogs everywhere and exposing them all these random things. So personally, I feel that you should go get a sport dog if you've been doing it for a while and you're kind of in a rut or you're like, man, all these dogs are doing the same damn thing. Yeah, he lays down, he does place, whatever. Because now your criteria is going to change. You're going to be around other trainers and you kind of come to that community where you see the dog has a very tight, like sphinx down instead of legs kicked out, sprawling on his back. And it starts to challenge your skills and how detailed can you be in your training. And that's like looking at her, she's a true representation of that because she's she's a sport dog. I'm like, I'm doing it right this time, and it shows. I'm like, all right, cool. And Crash is going to be a good street dog. It's just different. But I do challenge every pet trainer, after you're proficient, you've got some kind of skill set where you feel comfortable, go get a sport dog. Whether, I don't care what sport it is, it's going to push you to be a better trainer and be more detailed in what you're doing. I was really happy, like, when Alex and Paul got their sport dogs, I was like, here we go. We're about to start seeing the real trainers come out.
Yeah, who's Alex and Paul? Those are the two that apprentice under you, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so they went from doing pet training to now they're competing in sports and working on that and seeing that other side of the fence of dog training. And I
I
think
was supposed to be going for his PDC in March.
oh, for real?
Cascade, yeah. It's even cooler, I think. There's a dog I bred, so I'm like, sweet.
Yeah, it's just fulfilling the prophecy.
Yeah.
But no, that's good, man. We're gonna go ahead and wrap it up. I think we actually talked about this way longer than I thought. I don't know why I thought this was gonna be like a 45-minute. And we're gonna be struggling, but we made it. I think this is where people are about sick of hearing us, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah, because the after show is about to start. But no, it really is good. Like I said in the beginning, like, I love having people on for sure, but I think 3 back to back was a little taxing on the social battery. Yeah. And I think part of it was because we were just getting into that flow state of just you and I talking, because I know we had or at least I did for sure, had our reservations about, we're like, dude, we're not as fluid as we would be on the phone. And I know you were pretty relaxed. You're like, it's just repetition based. You know, we just have to keep doing it. I was like, dude, I'm panicking. But, and then as I was listening, like, I'm producing the episodes, editing, and I'm like, oh, dude, that actually sounds a little bit better. You know, we're actually flowing. And then we just had 3 weeks of not doing it. So I was kind of worried how this would go. And then watching the time, probably the majority of this, I'm like, this is going to go well beyond an hour. But no, it's always good to have people on. But it's also nice to just do it at our own pace. Like, we were supposed to start, this should have been done, like, actually 2 hours ago.
Yep.
I'm sure Lilia's pretty pissed. I'm surprised she didn't throw that tea on you.
Yeah. Supposed to go horseback riding. She's like, this motherfucker's over here still on the podcast.
Yeah, it is Valentine's Day weekend. My bad.
Nah, we're good. She would have thrown the tea if it was that bad.
But that's your measurement?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up so you don't get no domestics happen.
Yeah.
But anyways, all right. If people want to reach out to you, if they want to get involved with what you're doing, how do they get to you?
Jonathan Moses K9 on everything. So JONATHN, Moses like the Bible, and then K9, letter K, number 9.
All right. Awesome. And then same for me, just different name change. Sean White, SEANWHIT, letter K, number 9 on all media platforms. And then if you really want to get to both of us at the same time, whether you want to talk shit or you want to question something, or you just want to, I don't know, be like A-Rod, if you want to be a guest on here, you can message us.
Reach out.
Yeah, message us, or you can hit both of us up simultaneously on wdw.pod on Instagram. So it'll shoot both of us a message and we can chat. But I guess, yeah, that'll do it for another episode of Working Dogs and Whiskey, number 20.
20. Yep.
There we go.
Killing
All
it.
right.